What if I told you that the burger you eat next year might not come from a farm, but from a bioreactor? Yeah, it sounds like something straight out of science fiction, but it's not. This is the world of cultured meat. Today, we're going to dive into this incredible technology and the absolutely wild global race to get it from the lab onto your dinner plate. So let's just ask the big question right up front. Will your next burger actually be grown in a lab? The tech is surprisingly close to making that happen. But the journey from a scientific breakthrough to what's for dinner, well, that road is filled with some really fascinating twists and turns. Okay, so before we get into the future of all this, we've got to take a step back and understand where it came from. Because you might be surprised to hear that this futuristic idea has actually been simmering for decades. And I mean, believe it or not, the basic concept isn't new at all. Way back in the 1930s, Winston Churchill was already talking about a world where we could grow just the good parts, like a chicken breast, without having to raise a whole chicken. But it took until 2013 for that vision to become a reality, when the world's first lab-grown hamburger was unveiled. And that moment, that single burger, proved this was no longer just a theory. So what exactly is cultured meat? Let's get this straight because it's super important. This is not a veggie burger. It's not a plant-based alternative. It is real, genuine animal meat. It's just made by growing animal cells directly without ever needing to raise and farm a whole animal. It's a total shift in how we think about meat production. So how do they do it? Well, it kind of breaks down into three basic steps. First, they take a tiny, completely harmless sample of stem cells from a living animal. Then, those cells get put into what's basically a big tank with a nutrient-rich smoothie that helps them multiply like crazy. And finally, they're grown on an edible structure, a scaffold, that helps them form into real muscle tissue, giving it the texture of the meat we're all used to. And you can bet a technology this groundbreaking has kicked off an intense global race. Right now, countries all over the world are competing to be the leader in this new food frontier. And what's really interesting is that each region has a totally different game plan for how they're going to win. First up, let's talk about Team Asia. These guys are an absolute R&D powerhouse. You've got countries like China and Singapore just pouring government money into the most advanced tech, like 3D bioprinting meat. Their strategy is all about mastering the deep, complex science. And it paid off. Singapore made history as the very first country in the world to actually approve cultured meat for sale. And get this, when you look at the intellectual property, the patents that form the foundation for this whole industry, China is just crushing it. They hold more patents than the US and Europe combined. That tells you this isn't just about research. It is a full-on strategy to own this new market. Now, let's hop across the Pacific to Team America, where the playbook is totally different. Instead of these huge government projects, it's a buzzing startup scene, all fueled by private venture capital. Their focus is less on brand new science and more on making the whole process cheaper and more efficient. And that strategy worked because they scored a huge win with regulatory approval from both the FDA and the USDA. And that was a massive moment. I mean, a real game changer. In June 2023, the USDA gave the final green light for two companies, US-Side Foods and Good Meat, to sell their cultivated chicken in the US. This was a giant leap from the lab to the actual marketplace. And last but definitely not least, you've got Team Europe and the UK, kind of the original pioneers of the whole alternative food scene. Their approach is really methodical. It's all about perfecting the core science. They're focused on things like optimizing the cell cultures and finding better, more ethical food to feed those cells. And in a really clever move, the UK has already gotten cultured meat on the market in pet food. All right, so we've got these three big global teams, all with different strategies. But here's the thing. They're all facing the exact same really tough challenges. The race to the dinner plate is on, but the track is absolutely littered with obstacles. And the biggest one, by far, it's the cost. I mean, just look at this. A staggering 65% of the entire cost of production comes from just one thing, that nutrient broth, the food that the cells eat. Sure, building bigger bioreactors is tough, but it's the insane price of this cell food that's the real bottleneck right now. So what that means is the entire industry is on this quest for a kind of holy grail. They need a cheap, ethical, and scalable replacement for the old way, which used expensive and pretty controversial fetal bovine serum. Finding this new magic formula is the single biggest key to making cultured meat affordable for everyone. But okay, let's say they do it. Let's say scientists crack the code on cost. There's another huge hurdle waiting for them, and it's a messy one: the regulatory maze. Getting the government to actually let you sell this stuff is complicated, and it's often very political. Right now, the world is completely split on this. On one hand, you have places like the US and Singapore that have created clear rules for getting it approved. But on the other hand, you have countries putting up major roadblocks. Italy's straight up banned it, and some US states are trying to do the same thing. It's creating this really confusing, fragmented landscape. And these hurdles aren't just about politics, they're about cash. In South Korea, which is a real hotspot for this research, a startup has to cough up about 35,000 US dollars just to apply for approval. That is a massive barrier for the little guys trying to get into the game. Okay, so we've looked at the science, the global players, and the massive challenges. So what does the future actually look like? When can we realistically expect to walk into a grocery store and see this on the shelves? Well, you probably shouldn't expect to be buying lab-grown T-bone steaks at your local supermarket anytime soon. The very first products that show up will likely be either premium, high-end stuff or hybrid products, things that blend cultured meat with plant-based ingredients to keep the price down. That perfect, juicy steak, that's still probably a few years away. Yeah, the road to your plate is going to be a pretty slow and steady process. For the next few years, the focus is going to shift away from pure science and more towards perfecting the manufacturing. Your first taste of cultured meat will almost certainly be at a fancy restaurant, where you might see something exotic on the menu, like cultured quail or a marbled Wagyu-style beef. Look, the science is here, the technology is real, and it is getting better every single day. But the biggest question isn't really about the science anymore. It's about us. Are our laws and regulations ready for this? And maybe more importantly, are we ready? Are our appetites ready to embrace a future where meat comes from a bioreactor instead of a farm? The answer to that is going to shape the future of food as we know it.